Plus, since we're talking about unrequited love, that's you're a persistent person.
Through rain or snow
So,
or closed doors.
what I want you to first do is I first want you to tell the audience what it is. What does unrequited love mean? And how did you find yourself falling into it?
Very good first question. Unrequited love is pretty simple. It's when you love somebody who can't or won't love you back. And as far as my own personal experience, just to give some perspective, I'm 46 now, and this happened the year I turned 30. So
Okay.
I've got some distance on it. But I started spending time with a man I knew from graduate school, and we had a really fun time together. There was definitely some chemistry. He had a girlfriend in another city. I had just gotten out of a relationship, and so I figured, okay, this will be fun for a while. There's definitely something between us. But as time passed, I began to want more and more for him to be mine. And he dropped on a couple of occasions hints, oh, my girlfriend and I are going to break up, that kind of thing. But then they didn't. And then they didn't some more. And when that happened, I became very frustrated and also mentally consumed. I was obsessed. It was very hard for me to think about anything else or do anything else but think of him. I felt like I was sort of ghosting through my life. I was teaching at the time and supposed to be working on a novel, and all of that I was just barely there for.
Was this the first time that in any of your relationships, male or female, that you had that type of obsessional love and or commitment or demand?
I think that you could say the nature of some previous relationships had obsessive times in them or stretches, and that's pretty common. We tend to get obsessed when we're falling in love, for example, and also when we're being rejected or things are falling apart. We become really preoccupied. That's what happens in our brains and our bodies and our hearts. And so I would say if you were to talk to past partners, they would say at times I could be very needy. Not always, but at times. And so there was some foreshadowing perhaps, but never did I feel this consumed, never before in my life. This was not a habit for me to get this wrapped up in someone or to be so persistent.
And in the other relationships, I'm assuming two things. I'm assuming you were in a relationship, so they gave you reason to believe that we are in this relationship.
Sure, that's a big difference.
Okay,
yeah.
that's a big difference. Now, how much of this, not to go into great detail, goes back to your relationship with your parents?
You know, that's such an interesting question. I have a very good relationship with my parents. They're not perfect people. I'm not a perfect person. We've had our changes.
You mean there are perfect parents in the world?
Oh, I thought there were.
There are. There are two in Switzerland, but they don't talk to each other.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, I would say I had a pretty psychologically healthy upbringing. And so what's interesting, to delve a little bit into the research at this point, is that parenting does really matter in all things psychological. It matters a lot. But I know from both my own experience and some of the women I spoke to, it's not necessarily that the broken family of origin leads someone to obsess someone and chase him. I think there are lots of factors involved, and surely some of them could have been rooted with certain dynamics with my parents, but I would not say I was unloved or raised in an insecure fashion.
Okay, so this is you. This just happened to be you, and this happened to be the person. Now we're giving him a name B.
Yes.
Okay, obviously that is name. Since I have no idea who he is, just for the audience sake. So I'm going to make up a name for him. Okay, I'm going to say Bill. Okay.
That's my husband's name.
Oh, I'm going to say Brian. I'm going to say Brian.
Brian is much better.
Brian. I'm going to say Brian. That's
Okay.
not good. We can't say Bill. Okay, so Brian. So this way it becomes more of a person. Was there a physical relationship that took place between you and Brian?
A couple of times, yeah.
Okay, and when I mean physical, was it intercourse or just kind of necking, or this is Gluck Radio. We could break any rules. We could say anything.
Right. As I've answered it before, kind of the everything but.
Oh, the everything but
situation, which was only a one-time kind of thing. The other time was just kind of kissing type things.
Okay, so he did encourage the fact that we're more than a friend.
Yeah, I think that
Everything
on
but
some
is,
level,
unless you're Bill Clinton, is usually sex.
yeah, I mean, certainly, outside of a heteronormative view of sex, it's definitely sex.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, I think he was terribly confused. And this is what's really important about unrequited love. It's not always this kind of like, the way people love celebrities, and have crushes on celebrities. There's no way that person's going to want you back. You're in a fantasy land, what have you. It's incredibly common in unrequited love scenarios for there to be something, and that something is very dangerous to the unrequited lover because every little sign of encouragement you're going to take as he wants me, I know he wants me, he's just not ready. And for this person, yeah, sure, we had our moments where we got physical, where he even expressed interest and affection, but the overriding landscape was he's with this other woman and not able to have a relationship with me. And I had to deal with that.
Correct. And even though you had to deal with that, he became the object of intense obsession.
Yes.
Now, if he would have at any point when that intense obsession, and could you talk about that? What did you do to express that intense obsession? How far did you go? Where did you take it?
Well, I still thank the universe that Facebook, texting, and all the other technologies we have now were not in existence when I was obsessed. It was still, telephone, answering machines that you press the button to get your message. Voicemail was starting to be popular, that kind of thing. So, but what I did, let's see, the range of behaviors, well, I would follow him, not overtly. He didn't know often that I was there. I would see, we worked in the same place and we lived in the same neighborhood. So I really knew his patterns, and I knew if I wanted to find him, there could be some way of catching a glimpse of him at the neighborhood coffee shop or on the campus we worked at. So there were those behaviors, and I would ride my bike by his apartment. That's a kind of classic unrequited love thing, the drive-by. And so for quite a while, those things were kept at kind of a low level. I was indulging my obsession in this way without an overt impact on him.
Okay.
With him, there were times where I would see him and try to persuade him. I'd send him poetry over email. I'd send him emails. But I think it wasn't until, and this was, I think, after that time where we did everything but, where I really just became very, very, very persistent, where I was calling and calling and calling. I remember going on a road trip to see my family and stopping at payphones to leave long, anguished messages that I'm sure were incredibly embarrassing to me and probably really creepy to him. And then one morning I woke up thinking, I don't understand why we're not together, and I walked the few blocks to his apartment. And he lived in a security building, but in that particular neighborhood, it was kind of casual what that meant, and I kind of just hung out until someone let me in the door, assuming I was just a nice person who lost her keys. And I went up to his apartment and banged on the door until he answered it with a phone in one hand, dialing 911, and a baseball bat in the other, saying, "Get out of here. I don't want to see you." And so that, to me, was at a moment where I look back. I wasn't out of the trance then, but that is a moment I keep referring back to as, wow, I went over the line. I lost control. This is not good. People shouldn't do this.
What finally, I mean, that's pretty strong. What finally allowed you to go out of the trance? And is there, let me first ask this question, is there a connection between unrequited love and self-esteem? Like, how was your self-esteem?
This is a question I've been thinking a lot about because I'm writing.
Because most people would say, "Listen," and I'm like that. You don't like me. That's fine. I mean, I won't even not like you back, but I won't really care very much. So tell me, what was going on with your self-esteem at that point? Why didn't you say, "I'm an attractive woman. This guy doesn't like me. I'll find someone who does"?
That's a really good question. I think overall, I don't think I'm someone with particularly low self-esteem, but I definitely have my moments. And in the area of romance, I can tell you I felt very beaten down by the kinds of relationships I'd had throughout my 20s. They'd get really exciting and go really well, and then they'd just crumble. And in some ways, this is very common. You're in this trial and error situation. But as I approached 30 and I wanted my life to be more secure, that felt harder and harder on me. I think I'd lost faith in, I think it was more a cognition than a self-esteem issue, honestly. 'Cause self-esteem is huge. And if I had had healthier self-esteem, I wouldn't have sunk into this cognition, this way of believing. But I think, honestly, I was thinking evidence shows that this is impossible. How can you truly be compatible and close with someone and trust them when you feel compatible and close for a while and then it falls apart?
Right.
So for me, what I did was I loaded so much of that onto him. He was the last man on earth. So maybe it wasn't so much self-esteem, but my self-worth, my confidence in myself to have healthy relationships all got invested in this one relationship. And I honestly believe there was nothing beyond
So
it.
if someone was trying to flirt with you during this time and some guy tried to pick you up, you would have nothing to do with it.
That didn't happen. I think I had a sort of a mental sign up at that point saying, stay away from me.
Okay.
But I guess I probably would have liked that. It would have given me a sense of possibility, but I can't say because it didn't happen, and I was very, I think, increasingly isolated at that point in my life. Some things were changing in my community. People in my life were getting married, having kids,
At what point did you
stabilizing in that
say,
way.
I am like going onto the nutsy side? Did you catch yourself, or did you actually think that this is the perfect soulmate for you and you need to convince him of that? Like, at what point were you going from rational to irrational?
Well, what's so interesting, and this is why I focus the book on women's experiences of unrequited love. This is so important. If a man had done what I had done that morning in the apartment,
He'd be
even
in
if
jail.
he didn't see it, yes, he may be in jail. That Brian, as you call him, never completed the call to 911. He ended up hanging up the phone. But if I had been a man, he probably would have completed the call, or somebody in my life would have said, "What are you doing? You have become a stalker." However, the kinds of feedback I would get, and then also that I was giving myself, was, he is driving me crazy. How come he can't see that this relationship should be? And why is he doing this to me, driving me to this? And that's a paradigm that's very common, even if you're not going overboard with stalking or unwanted pursuit, what that other person is doing to you. And sure, people can be manipulative and they can be cruel, but very often they're extremely confused. They don't know what they want. Deciding to love someone or feeling love for someone is extremely complicated, yet we all have that right to choose who we're going to be with. And when you don't accept that someone doesn't want you back, you're not accepting that they have that right to choose.
Correct.
So to answer your question, when did I realize I was going nuts? It actually took a really long time. Not until I think after I was married and had a kid could I really see. After I was married, not after I had a kid.
Okay, so actually when it was replaced by someone who gave you that love.
Yes.
And usually that, by the way, is the case. I call it the monkey syndrome. When you go from one branch to another, you tend to change. Interestingly enough, your advice, so many women who are going to be listening to this around the country, around the world, they're going to say, well, it's different for me.
They will say that.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's that's her experience, but this guy I know is my soulmate, and I would tell them, listen, if you put your key right now into my drawer, my lock, and try to open it up, my lock is not rejecting your key, and your key is not rejecting my lock. It just doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a beautiful metaphor, actually.
Just doesn't fit.
Yeah.
And if things don't fit, don't try to make them fit. Don't put yourself in a place of trying to convince someone to like you. What would be your words of wisdom?
My words of wisdom, they're very similar, actually. If you're working that hard, you need to see the proof that this person isn't responding, because it's just too frustrating. If the person's driving you crazy, you definitely have to stop. I would have a corollary to that, though, too, is that one of the biggest factors in unrequited love is imagination and fantasy. And that can be used to dismiss it, but I also feel that, imagination is a huge part of what makes the world go around. We imagine solutions, we imagine creative outputs such as art, music, writing. imagination is a very important human impulse. So use the fact that you've had this fantasy and see where you can take it other than toward that person. What information is that giving to you? Can it inspire you in a certain way? Can it simply tell you what you want so badly? If I could have reckoned, for example, with the fact that even as a self-identified feminist and independent, strong woman in so many ways, I just really badly wanted a relationship to work and
Right.
to move into a future of marriage and a family. If I could have simply reckoned with that and said, well, is this person getting me anywhere toward that goal? I would have been able, I hope, to see more plainly that he absolutely wasn't.
Interesting. Being an expert in practicing neuroplasticity for 38 years, the real problem was that you were stuck in your emotional brain.
Yes.
Your rational brain, was shut down, or was screamed down. When rationally you tried to climb out, your emotions said, "I don't want to hear about it."
Yeah.
Okay, I want this guy. Okay, and this guy's going to complete me. So I would probably boil it down, to make sure that your rational brain is in charge, and to realize something that is right now so relevant to the world around us is let people have their boundaries.
Yeah.
Don't try to convert anyone, whether it's religion, whether it's philosophy or politics. State your position and then respect someone else's position. And also, at one point, to notice if you can't do that, was there at any point that you got help?
Yeah, but I wasn't good at getting
Was
help.
it- You failed at getting help.
I failed. She said to me, one thing that happened that is relevant is I actually had a very good therapist, but she left her practice. And this happened not very long before the obsession began. And that was a loss, and loss is a factor. In addition to the fact that I had just been dumped by someone right before the obsession. Those two things are huge risk factors.
Oh, yeah, you
for
dumped from the
pursuit.
obsession, then your therapist dumps you. Really,
Yeah. It was basically the boyfriend before Brian dumped me, and the therapist helped me out of that. But then she said, "Look, I'm leaving my practice." So when I went to a new therapist, she said, "You're kind of crossing a line here. You're being inappropriate," and I never went back. It's not funny at all, but she wasn't the right person.
Did she
for
think
me.
that you were crossing a line with her?
No. With when I told her what I was doing with as you call Brian.
Right.
Yeah. If I could, there's one. I love how you talked about the rational mind. Can I respond to that? Is that
Sure, you
okay?
can say anything you want.
So what I would also say is almost to meet you at that place, but then also in terms of reconciling that with valuing the passionate imagination that goes on, which is a hard concept to get because you think, oh, that passionate imagination sure did get you to a good place, didn't it? It's hard to see the value of it. But there are certain models for this. There are women in my book who talked about feeling the passion for someone, but actually putting boundaries around it. So it's almost like the case was your rational mind case, but within it, they could still feel great passion for someone they knew wasn't going to reciprocate. And this is, again, kind of a bizarre idea.
No, actually, it's not.
important.
Actually, it's
Okay.
not. And Einstein really, in fact, said imagination, creativity is more important than just about anything else. To be able to use your imagination, it is actually on a higher level than intelligence, or on a much different level because it actually transcends it. But it is the ability to make sure the prison is strong enough to contain the imagination, and that there's enough rationale in the frontal lobe to say this is where I'm going to place it, even though I have my private imagination. So, but I would agree. I would agree there's a place for imagination. It gives hope. There's so many people who experience, and this is pandemic, they experience intense loneliness. I mean, literally to the point where they want to kill themselves. If they didn't have an imagination to think that someone was going to sweep them off their feet and love them forever, and they were going to be in front of the Christmas tree or the Hanukkah bush or whatever the case might be, they might just as well have gone off that cliff. So imagination has its place.
Yeah, and you can even think of it in a spiritual way, right? People who are spiritual love a God, they love, some God, some form of a deity. but they don't get direct response from that deity at all. They don't get direct reciprocation, but they feel sometimes very often very enlivened by that spiritual path and the mysteries of it. I'm almost talking about a kind of mystical spirituality.
Okay.
And so this woman who let herself have this crush on a much younger man needed to have that crush, needed to feel those feelings, knew from her past how destructive they could be. And she said, this time, I'm just going to walk this mystery. I'm going to enjoy it. And I'm not going to expect anything from this person. Again,
Right.
very hard to do.
Right.
but
She was
knowing
very
that it's
rational. And the
possible.
one thing
Yeah.
that I would say, Lisa, you are a success story. How many people end up dead, literally dead, because the boyfriend or the person who thinks he's the boyfriend or the girlfriend actually will take it to the next level and become violent, either violent against the person who's not loving them back or violent against the person who they love. So
Yeah.
I want us to kind of underline if these are traits that you see in yourself, that you fall in love with someone who is not in love with you, let it go.
Absolutely. That absolutely needs to be underscored. And that is something that, again, for both men and women, if you are becoming aggressive, angry, violent, if it's all about you, not about the other person's need for distance, these are all signs of needing to get help and needing to exercise a lot of self-control. This is not one of these cases where you're going to have this mystical experience. That's not happening at all. What's happening is you're being very aggressive. So realizing that line is a huge part of my book. It's a huge part of this syndrome, but it is a very multifaceted state.
And I want to validate something which you said. You walked into a therapist's office, she gave you an answer, but something was wrong. And I tell people, therapy is such a soft science. Most sciences are so soft as opposed to engineering and architecture where they're more hard sciences. If you're going for help and you really don't like the person, don't go back. But go somewhere.
Yeah.
Find someone who you could actually like. If you don't like everyone, well, then take a look and see, well, what's going on, with yourself. How did you meet your husband?
Actually, pretty shortly after my obsession began to end.
Began to end. Okay.
Began to end, which basically happened when Brian told me we can never speak again. He just cut off all communication with me, and I was exhausted. I needed to hear that, and I went home and had a fever and threw up and honestly felt as if a demon had left me. And it was a turning point. I was still very shaken and still consumed, but
See, I'm so
point.
glad you said that, because
Yeah.
what happens is with guys and or women, because it could be both ways, is that don't think you're doing the person any favor by saying, who knows what will happen. Someday, who could tell? You never know. That's not helping the person.
No, it's not helping.
Okay, in fact, you're just creating the fuel for the obsession. If you know you never intend to be seriously involved with this person, you say there's not a shot in hell, and if there was the last person on earth, I'd be single. And even though they're hurt and they curse you out on Facebook, at the end of the day, you allow them to go on.
Yeah, that's true. That is the choice of mercy, really, even though it seems so cruel. So
It's a mercy kill.
I'm glad he gave me that mercy. I'm very glad. So a few weeks later, I left where I was living. I was living in Pittsburgh, and I went to an artist colony to work on a novel I was writing at the time. And I was there for a couple of weeks, and it was a great place for me because I knew I couldn't do anything to this person anymore. I couldn't reach out. It was, I don't even think there was much email there. It was just, boom, no way. And so I began to get my attention back, began to really work on this book. And at the end of the time, a few days before I was to leave, I met the man who would become my husband in the dining hall. And we started talking. He's a visual artist. And
His name is Brian, right?
His name's Bill.
I'm
Bill
kidding.
Mead.
I'm teasing you.
Yeah, he's a painter, and I loved his paintings, and we spent a lot of time, stayed very late talking, and we didn't have an affair, as people supposedly do all the time at these colonies, but we decided to stay in touch. And
Okay.
he had just bought a home in Woodstock, and we stayed in touch.
Pretty hippie-ish.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say either of us are hippies exactly, but there are a lot of artists and writers and
Of course.
thinking
Of
people
course.
and some hippies.
And
So,
some hippies,
yeah.
Yeah, I prefer to use the word free spirit, my generation.
There are definitely many free spirits in Woodstock still.
There you go. No, absolutely. Question. Did you ever question yourself, am I in love with a person or am I in love with being in love because being in love is a drug?
During the experience?
Even now?
Oh, sure. I've thought about that a lot. I think that was something I thought a lot about as I processed this experience in particular, because also during my 20s I had some struggles with depressive episodes, and I knew that feeling whenever I was beginning to have a relationship, it would lift me up considerably.
Right.
But also, as research shows, having a propensity toward depression also makes rejection a lot harder. So just now I was reading about a study on that, very dynamic. So yeah.
I usually like to simplify the study, which I boil it down to is you cannot commit suicide by jumping out of a basement, but you can from the 100th floor. So when you really intensely, you have this intense in love, insane, and it lets you down, you have a long way to fall. But when you take it slow and easy and you're climbing very slowly, then you don't fall that far.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So how do now you're married for how long now?
13 years it'll be this year.
Excellent.
Yeah.
How do you continually renew that feeling of love? How do you keep what everyone struggles for, doing coaching and hypnosis for close to 40 years, from going of being in love to just, I love you, and things get a little bit dull? How do you keep the in love alive?
That's such a great question. I think that for both my husband and for me, we'd been out there for a while. We'd been dating for a long time. My husband's 11 years older than I am, and we married when I was in my 30s and he was in his 40s. And I think we were really just profoundly glad. I mean, we felt great passion for each other, of course, but we were profoundly glad to be compatible, to be able to be good to each other. I think for me, the essence of a good marriage is to assume as much as you're humanly possible that person is on your side and never out to get you, that if something happens that is not so wonderful, it's not because they're out to get you. And then to be able to be good to each other, to treat each other well and with respect. And to me, that's extremely exciting. That may sound very dull.
No, it actually doesn't.
Hard to find these
you know what?
days.
It is. You're 100% right. People talk all the time about passionate love, and I tell them, you know what? Great, passionate love. Get married, and you're going to wish for continued comfort love, where you're comfortable.
Yeah, you're really right.
Where you're rolling over and you're in one another's arms and it's really comfortable and it's not a performance, that's measured in the number of orgasms which you had, but it's measured in the fact that you really enjoy spending time together. So do you consciously always try to reinvent the marriage, knowing how important it is to you? And what kind of man did you end up marrying?
Well, I would say I constantly tried to take care of the marriage. The taking care is better. Reinvention, that sounds wonderful, but it also sounds exhausting. And if I needed to do that I get it. I know people have written about that, but I don't feel I need to. I feel that there's comfort. Now, another thing is my husband travels frequently. And
that helps.
I miss him terribly when he's gone, but I think it means that we both know there's going to be space and that it helps us. Perhaps there's a little bit of reinvention, as you put it, going on when he returns. It keeps some passion, spicy stuff of like, oh, I can't wait to see him kind of thing going on.
No. I think that, for those who complain that their husbands travel, they don't realize that at the end of the day, it really does help spice it up.
Yeah.
Yes, for all those out there with little children, 4 or 5 little children, it is impossible when they travel So we understand that. So you get a pass for hating their guts.
Yeah, no, that part is hard when my daughter was young.
Are many women who have this type of jealousy compulsion, have they crossed the line into mental illness?
Oh, that does happen, absolutely. And I actually felt like my approach to that, because I'm not a psychologist, I'm a journalist. I do discuss that a little bit in my book, but I did feel like that end of it was out of my league.
Right, so you didn't want to touch it.
So
I will say, I would
borderline
say,
psychosis, all that stuff.
I would say that very often that is the case, and that very, very often the person needs some professional help, because jealousy is one of the very few things that could actually almost guarantee violence on some level.
Yeah, if you are a sociopath or a
Right.
psychopath or borderline or
Correct.
there are other illnesses that will do it to you, and I think I very
You just
much
you just covered 80% of the New Yorkers.
there we go. Okay, and that combined with jealousy, you can get into kind of fixed delusional state where
Right.
you must vanquish your rival, as astronaut Lisa Nowak did back in 2007. And believe like, okay, that's going to solve your problems, and yes, that's definitely you've gone into mental illness territory, definitely.
How do men and women differently experience unrequited love?
It's interesting because there's no evidence that men or women experience it any more or less than men. I think that the experience of it is actually probably very similar, but we look at men and women differently. So the men I've talked to many men about unrequited love, though the book focuses on women. The feelings of longing, obsession, all-consuming, feeling, and so forth, and then also the danger of unwanted romantic pursuit or stalking. All those things exist with men and women, and actually at very rival rates. So, for example, in everything except criminal stalking, the kind of stalking you get arrested for that causes, that persistently invades someone's life and causes fear, men are, it's something like 9 out of 10 are men who are criminal stalkers.
Okay.
But if you look at, there's been a range of really interesting research on what's called, there are many names for it, but called unwanted romantic pursuit. Or obsessive relational intrusion is another term. And these encompass the spectrum of behaviors that you do that are more everyday. The over-texting, the banging on the door, the showing up unexpectedly, those range of behaviors, even if they don't fit that criminal definition, which requires repeated, unwanted, threatening, causing fear.
Right.
So in that spectrum, men and women have rival rates for a wide range of behaviors, including the more violent and abusive ends of behavior.
I would, from my experience of literally 38 years, I would completely agree with that. I would say that what happens with women is that, for the most part, they are more prone to follow the guy, see who he's with, but not necessarily get out of the car and fight with the woman. Now, it does happen once they reach a certain point, meaning once there's a boiling point and each party goes over that, men and women act exactly the same.
Well,
because the craziness is at that point actually, in that place where there's no filter, no rational filter.
yeah.
So once there's no rational filter and it's just your emotions, but women are a little bit better at keeping it. They'll have their friends check up on the other guy.
Actually, the research doesn't really support what you're saying. Interestingly, and
well,
let me explain the basis of the research.
That's okay. Research could be wrong.
Is into, well, you're dealing with a general population clientele. The research is mainly done on college students.
Right.
And this is because they're the available pool. You can give them a little extra credit for filling out the survey and all that stuff, and that's just true of so many psychological studies. But studies of college students done since the late 90s have repeatedly showed, rival rates of everything, including causing physical harm. Again, not the murder stuff, But the causing of physical harm is one of them. We're actually on a couple of surveys. It's been shown that women do a little more.
No, once they cross that line,
yeah.
I think it's a little bit even. Before they cross that line,
That could be so.
you know, I mean, that's my experience
Yeah.
with a lot of experience going on.
And it
And you're
probably
right,
changes
it
with
is
age,
different.
too.
I don't have, you know, my clients are adults, you know, and professionals, so it's a different clientele, so probably a different study.
Yeah, which would be a very hard study to do. But, you know, again, because getting people to, you know.
Well, to admit,
To
you know,
admit to it,
you're the
yeah.
CEO of a company, and you're stalking your secretary. You don't really want to admit to that, and you want to do it in such a way that you're not going to get caught and fired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One more quick thing on men and women is after romantic rejection, women will tend to feel and talk. Men will tend to shut down and abuse drugs. And I'm not saying all men, but the research shows is that's how they skew in terms of the things they do to cope with that disappointment. They'll tend to bottle up more, and men will bottle up more.
Correct. And
Yeah.
women generally have more friends than men.
Yeah.
You know,
And who they can
and that's
talk to.
why who
Yeah.
they vent out.
Yeah.
Eventually, they lose their friends if they don't stop. What was your lowest point? Did you ever have to yourself, you know, force yourself to get help psychiatrically, or the lowest point was the story that you shared when you showed up and he had
wasn't showing up at the door,
That
you know,
wasn't
because
it.
he eventually opened the door, and we talked and we spent the day together. You know, so
really
it
interesting.
was a very confusing situation. So I wasn't low at that point. I mean, I wasn't very good either. I was very fragile at that point, but I was not a lowest point. The lowest point was one morning I woke up thinking, I cannot keep feeling this way, and I called a friend and we went to the psychiatric hospital in my community, and it was the outpatient, and they took my keys, and I smoked a little then, so my cigarette lighter and anything that was sharp in my possession, and I walked in and had a consultation with an intern, and I didn't check myself in or anything like that, but I just said, look, I can't keep feeling this way. This is unbearable. Is there something you can do? And he gave me a prescription for tranquilizers.
Okay.
So what it was, I think that point where day after day I would wake up and the day wouldn't be any better. I wouldn't be any less consumed, any less obsessed, and he wasn't loving me back or starting a relationship with me. I just was completely worn out, and so I sought that help.
Well, let me say this, because time is running out. Some people's books are just good read. Yours is a essential read.
Oh, that's so kind of you.
You know,
to
and
say.
I really mean this. You know, doing what I do for as long as I do, jealousy is a disease that if you let get out of control, you will find that your entire life will be flushed down the drain. And what you are doing is you're letting people look at themselves in a mirror where they can identify with a person who is not writing about it just from her own research, but who's lived it, who's came out of it, who actually is living a successful life and a happy life, apparently with bumps, because if you weren't from this planet, you know. But it is something that I am going to push because I think it's so essential. And you are a great interviewer.
Well, thank you so
An
much.
interviewee. I'm the interviewer.
I used to be an interviewer. Thank you so much. You're a wonderful interviewer, and this has been a very enjoyable conversation, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.